Are you struggling with creating beautiful layers with your gel prints? If so, you are not alone. You may have seen so many videos that make it look very simple, but you're still struggling to get great results. Join me as I show you 2 different ways I create layered prints with my gel plate and how to get the best results every time. So I'm going to show you one of the simplest ways that you can do layering with the gel plate. And this is a technique that I learned soon after I started playing around with the gel plate. And that is using a previous print that's maybe a little less interesting and use it for adding another layer of paint on top. So you can see with each of these, they're okay, but they could use maybe a little something. I'm going to start with this piece. And one thing to think about is color variation. So with this one, this is a lot of teal and yellow. So I'm going to add in some pinks and light purples. And so this will make a lot more sense when I start adding this in. With these ones, you can also just create a brand new jelly print layer using some of your favorite paints. And then look to print on top of it as well too. So that's another option. But when I was starting out, I found this really helpful for figuring out how layers work together. So one thing to be aware of is that when you are doing this technique, you're going to be basically covering up a big section of this layer. So be aware of that just as you create. I think I might be going a little heavy with the paint here, but you know what? I'll do my best. And if it's too much, then I'll just blur it off on another piece of paper. And so I'm trying to get that paint to cover the whole thing. And then we're going to spread it out. I just find that this first layer is always the one that takes the longest, right? Because you're trying to get those really thin layers of paint to spread really, really nicely, but it's worth the time, right? Okay, there was quite a bit of pink there, so. And so I have a bit too much paint on this, but it'll be okay because I have some thinner layers down here, some thicker layers up here. It'll be okay with what I'm going to plan to do with this first layer. It'll work. It'll work. It's a little heavy. You can always tell because if you can see texture in your paint, you know you put it on a little too heavy, but that's okay. So what I'm going to do is add in this stencil. So stencils are great for these types of techniques. The main reason being when you add in your next piece on top, these areas that you see that are being masked on the surface are going to be the parts you're going to be seeing through this layer below. It'll make a lot more sense when I put it on. And this is why I often like to print near the bottom, is if I'm doing a technique like this, it gives me a better chance of being able to line things up well. Okay, so now we're just going to give this a rub. So we've done this on one that we've already added a layer of paint on, right? Okay, so now let's pull that up. So there we go. So now we have a really nice print. So you can see that because the layers are thin, you can see a little bit of that color below. It kind of blends to make some really interesting colors. And that's why it's good to kind of think about some of the colors you're trying to put together and what the final effect is going to look like. But overall, you're getting a great print. But because these areas fully masked with that stencil, you were able to still keep some of those bottom layers as well. So often when I do this type of work, I will pull that up and I will take a print. And then this print will be really great for just another piece, right? So sometimes you end up running into a situation where you end up with extra pieces just as you're trying to come up with unique layers, right? But that is a very cool layer all on its own, right? Because it had a little less paint on there. Look at all that fun texture we create just by using a stencil. But what if you're working with a much more blah layer like this, where you don't really want a ton of it showing up? Well, that's really easy to do as well. This is where you can take ones that maybe you're really not happy with and do some really interesting things with them. So instead of just adding paint and putting that on, we're going to do something else here. So I'm just cleaning my burr off of my surface because it's not going to go badly with the colors that I'm going to be choosing next. So I'm going to add in a touch of Prussian blue in a couple spots. I'm going to add in some other blue. Also add in some gold. So again, I'm still kind of struggling with how much paint I'm using. The other hard thing for me is because I do have my studio lights, they're drying the paint a lot faster. So if you're working in a less hot environment or something a bit drier, This is, you can go even lighter than what I'm doing with my paint here. It's just because I find with my studio lights, they like to take over so much. This is a chance for me to be able to try to keep everything moving as I talk. So I find that sometimes just by the time I talk and show you stuff, the paint is already starting to dry on the surface just due to my studio lights. But again, it's part of that's because it's about 5 degrees hotter with my studio lights on than it normally would be. So keep that in mind. So if you're printing on a warm day versus a cool day, that's also going to affect just how fast your paint dries and moves. You can also move in other directions. I tend to go often this way. You can change directions and do different things, and don't feel like you have to stick with just one direction. That's just something that I've done, and you can see a couple spots here due to the thickness of the paint in a couple of these areas. I am going to have some spots, but that's okay because I don't mind them in this situation. I'm going to start off by, and sometimes I'll do this with a brayer just so that I can get a bigger impression. You can add your impression into your paint. That's always fun to do. Then I'm going to come in with a little bit of a bubble wrap. And I didn't have to do the whole thing, but I'm just going to because it's fun. Then I'm going to come over. Yeah, then I'm going to do something a little bit different. I am going to add in a couple different stencils at the same time. So I have my fish mask here. And you know what? I'm just going to go over the whole thing. Why not? Never tried this before, so we're going to try and see how this looks. So I don't want to lose all of that orange, but I also want to show you what it looks like when you put a mask across it, like how much variation you can kind of get in color. So again, masks are great for this. I will get a lot more into using stencils versus masks in future videos, but masks are nice just because the fact that the type of image they kind of give you that image that you can, that positive image, or really in this case a negative image that you can use. You get a really defined shape. So with these ones, I'm just trying to get into all those little holes. Again, because we already have a layer of paint on top, it's not going to stick in the same way as it would just on regular paper. But once we pull that up, so we have a fish and we also have that background. The one bad thing about this is you lose a little bit of the definition of just the fish itself. Okay? But let's say you weren't wild about that and you're like, well, I'd really like to have the fish really standing out on this piece. Not a problem. So now we're going to get into the second way. So we've talked about layering with adding it on top of another print. There's also ways you can layer on the surface. So when you are using these ones, what's happening is you're basically covering up a whole bunch of the area of the previous image. But at the same time, by using things like bubble wrap, you're getting a little bit of that pink color through, that pinky orange color through below. With that stencil, you're ending up with areas that are very defined from the color below. In this case, if I hadn't had that stencil, this would have been all those kind of blue pinks with basically our fish shape. But what you have to think about is that the first layer that you're using is going to be mostly covered unless you put things in here that are going to mask off those areas. So that's the one technique. The other way you can do it is basically build your surface from front to back. And so right now we have some paint down here. I'm not sure if this will work properly just because some of this paint has dried. And we do want the paint to dry, but it might get a little bit funky here. So bear with me, we're going to play. This is the thing, it's like every time I do this, depending on the thickness of my paint, the heat in the house, how long things have been kind of sitting, this can create some interesting times. And I'll show you another way of doing this from scratch. So I'm just trying to use up all my old paint tubes first before I pull out. I have a bunch of new paint, but I'm like, use up all the old stuff first. And yes, there's still more in those tubes than maybe what you think. Okay, and so what I'm doing is I'm going over this entire surface because basically the paint on there is now pretty much dry. You can tell it's fairly dry just because of the fact that it isn't shiny anymore. If you touched it, it's not going to be pulling up a lot of color. But what's cool about this is so now we're getting our variation of our fish shape, right? And let's just try to get it in between some of those holes and some of those places. Okay, so now I'm going to pull this and let's see what we get. So now what we've done is we've added in a layer on top of a layer. And so if someone did make the comment that, like, why do you do it at the bottom? If you center it, you could frame them. That is true. If you think that whatever print that you've built, you basically just want to frame the thing, then have an even amount around all the edges. But in my case, I find that I tend to like being able to have the option of lining them up again and adding another layer of paint on if I felt so inclined. And so with these ones, they should really kind of resist being pulled off. I see a spot there. I'm hoping I can... no, that paint's not coming up. So we have to be kind of careful with this technique. You add too much paint, you will not lift all the layers. That was the one takeaway I've had from this technique. But you can see that from something that I started with as a base layer for this guy, I had added in a bunch of the paint around it, then pulled the mask. You end up with a very different look than you would with this one. For this one, we added our top layer on our previous layer. In this case, that last layer, that blue, is now in the background. So this is the thing. You need to think about, am I building back to front or front to back? And that's going to affect how you end up doing these prints. Let's do one of these from scratch. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take a little bit of hand sanitizer, cleaning my plate quick. Most of the time, I do not clean my plate, but when I'm using a lot of imagery, I will clean my plate in between prints. Just because some of that stuff, I don't really want to have half a fish image show up, let's say, on a tree or a flower, right? So when those situations come up, that's when I clean my plate. I like to clean my plate after a printing session, but it isn't totally necessary. It really is up to you. Again, I'm not removing all of it. I just want to remove enough of it that that fish is not showing up again. Let's do a very basic print using a couple layers. I'm going to add in a little bit of Prussian blue, add in a little bit of this purple. I love Prussian blue. It's just a ridiculously good color. And so this is going to be a fairly dark one, and I'm okay with that. Yeah, it's trying to get all your paint on there and then getting it to spread out. You really want to try to stay away from having those kind of bubble areas. And so yeah, this ended up being mostly Prussian blue. Prussian blue tends to take over, so just be aware of that. But this is a really good way of being able to show you what a dual print layer looks like. So let's just use a few things that I have hanging around here. We're going to start with a piece of string. Okay, we're just going to add it on like that. And sometimes with these ones, I like to... It wasn't supposed to pick it up, but I'm trying to get it so that it has lines in there. And so sometimes a brayer can work really well for just trying to press that in. It looks pretty cool, actually. I'm pretty happy with that. Those are kind of fun lines, right? Yeah, and actually just leaving it on the brayer, I'm like, oh, okay, that's really working. Okay, that was not planned, but hey. But then just pull it off, let it dry, and just reuse the string again at some point. Okay, so now I can come in and go, well, maybe I want a little bit of bubble wrap on here. So let's add in a little bit of bubble wrap in places. And let's maybe finish off with a couple lines of some cardboard. Maybe another line like that. There we go. Okay, so now what we need to do is, so we've added our first layer of paint. Now we've got to let the thing dry. I would suggest do not use a heat gun. Someone was asking me the other day, well, why don't you just use heat on it? And then I was looking online going, well, let's see what other people say. And a lot of it was, it's really bad for your gel plate. It can be really bad for your gel plate. Maybe not right away, but over time it can make it dry out and crack, and that's the last thing you want to do. So if you're really concerned about drying quickly, you can always grab a pile of copy paper and just go over top of it like this. But again, you can see that I have a few areas that are not perfectly dry, but it's dry enough. Okay, so how about we do a little bit of green and yellow. That'll be my next layer. And again, if you've let it dry long enough, none of this should smear. You should end up with two really good layers. So this green is a fairly transparent one. It's it's called semi-opaque, so semi-transparent, in other words. So again, sorry, trying to use up what I have. So this may not come out perfectly evenly. Yeah, like that. That was too much. So if that's the case, sometimes I will just even grab some, put it there, put the rest of my piece of paper. Yes, finger painting. Here we come. Okay, so now what we're trying to do is, again, we're trying to get that nice thin layer of paint. If it is not a thin layer, you should be able to see some of the pattern underneath. If it is not thin enough, what's going to happen? It's only going to pull up part of the print because it's going to be like, well, it's thick enough. There's enough paint on there. The paper that you're working with is only going to absorb so much. When it absorbs so much of that first color, so like that's almost too much. So I'm just, you know, you can always just burr it off on another piece of paper. You want to be able to see a little bit of what's going on below. Otherwise, it's not going to pull the whole thing up. It's going to pull up the wet areas, and then anything that's dry and that's difficult isn't going to pull up. So you can see that we've gone mostly green just because of the nature of the transparency of the yellow. It's just not going to be quite as strong. Already I can tell this is starting to dry, so that's a good sign. That means I should be able to get a good print. Again, use these sheets for like those second layers, especially if you're planning on doing that first technique I showed you, because it works really well. So that's looking good. It looks just, it's still wet, but it's not super, super, super gooey. Like when you touch it, you shouldn't be able to have your hand slide. If your hand slide, you've added way too much paint. So I'm just going to give this a nice good rub. You should be getting, there we go. It should be like trying to pull a sticker off of something. If you do not feel like you're pulling a sticker off of something, it's not giving that much pull, you are not going to get that full image. So you can see here, like it is fighting me. I have to be careful. Okay, so there we go. In my case, my gel plate actually needs a baby oiling. So what happens is if it's too dry and you have too much sticking on here, this is when you know you need to condition your plate, is when this happens. And that was such a nice print too. Oh, okay. So when this happens, don't worry. Don't get stressed. Don't worry too much. Okay. What I'll do is I'm going to show you really quickly. This is totally not part of the video, but let's just do it because you're going to run into this at some point. If it's too sticky or if it's too dry, this is what's going to happen. Things are going to come off in pieces. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to throw this underneath the sink. I'm going to give it a little bit of a really mild soap and a little bit of water. I'm going to clean it up. I'm going to show you how we can baby oil it. And this is going to make a big difference on how those final layers pull up, especially when we're doing these dried layers. What I've done right now actually is just given it a really quick wash. There's still stuff on the surface. This is why I don't mind using hand sanitizer, because it is going to help. And again, very gently, circular motions, try to get all that extra paint off the surface. So yeah, if you ever find your gel plate is too sticky, it's not working according to plan, you're getting rips like I managed to majorly rip that paper, and you'll find this especially when you work with thin layers of paint and you're working on like a gel plate that you've been using for a while. It takes a while for it to get to this point, but you can see just how much paint I pulled up just from that first layer. But then now let's go in and I'm going to grab my baby oil. One of the reasons I keep baby oil around, it's great for conditioning your gel plate. I understand other types of oil you can also use for this. I just particularly like baby oils because I use it for other art stuff. So I just basically added a little bit to my surface and I'm just rubbing it on out. So this is how we condition our plate. You'll see how much stuff it's pulling up, right? You think you've gotten all the stuff off and then you just keep finding more. So I'm just gonna do this a third time just to make sure it's this nice and even. This thing has like a squeeze top, but it's a little hard to control. So just, you know, bear with me here. The thing with the gel plate is you do want it to take your paint well, stick to your plate, but you do not want it stuck on there to the point where you're ripping your prints, right? So yeah, look at that. That's just so much better. And so I'm just removing any excess baby oil. Here we go. And then another wipe through. So that's how you condition your plate. So if you've never seen how to condition a gel plate, there you go. Now you know how. So it should feel a little bit soft, a little gentle to the touch. So let's try this again. I'm going to go a little less of the blue this time. And yes, so I have included in all my mistakes for today as well too. And that's on purpose because again, like I can show you how everything works perfectly all the time. And you're not really going to learn what you need to learn to be able to find success in this. The other way you can tell whether or not it is time to condition your plate is if you're finding you're getting lots of splotchy spots like this, that you're ending up with like that in your print. Because you can see now that we've added in that extra baby oil, now what we're running into is we're getting really clean spreading of our paint. So let's try this again. Okay, let's start with the string again because I really like the string. I thought that was really good. Oh, and now I've added in some yellow because I had that glop of yellow, but that's okay. Okay, now it's just completely on my brayer, and that works so good. I am so excited about that, and I know I said now it's wrapped on my brayer, and now I'm making a mess, right? But I'm like, I'm totally okay with that because that was awesome. It will do the same thing. I like the bubble wrap. I also really like the cardboard, but maybe we'll just do a little less. We'll do a bottom corner like so. Maybe a little top spot like that. Okay, so now we gotta let this dry. You want this dry enough that you can smooth a layer of paint over top without losing your first layer. Because you don't want to be picking up the paint you just put down. Because when you pick up the paint you just put down, then you're not really going to get the result that you want, right? And maybe should let this dry a little bit more, but that's okay. We're just going to run with it the way it is. So any of the areas that you put those marks in, what's basically doing is you're going to see the next layer in it. And like we're trying to get a fairly smooth layer of color in there. We don't want this gloppy. If it's gloppy, it's not going to pull up the print. Okay, so now I rub across the whole thing. And hopefully, because we've added the baby oil and we've conditioned our gel plate, we should be in a great place to pull up a really good print. Okay, so you can see this one area here was not fully dry. And I added a bit too much paint along the bottom here. So you can see that for this part of the print, it pulled it up beautifully. On this part, it didn't work out quite as well because I think you see a lot of green in here because that particular top layer was not fully dry. And then I add other paint so it's smeared together. But that's the reason why these dual layer ones where you dry the paint on the surface can be a bit challenging. Just because the fact that if you don't have all your layers dry enough, if you haven't quite figured out how to get these layers to kind of work together, it can be very hit and miss. And even for me, it's like I've been doing this for quite a while, but I still get hit and miss with these types of layers, right? And I find with the studio lights, it also makes it a bit more challenging because I'm finding that it's a little harder to know where that precise area for drying time should be. Like, do I want it to be really dry? Do I not want it to be really dry? Like, where do I want to take this, right? So sometimes if I want a really strong stenciled image, I will put on a stencil. I'll stamp on through, and then whatever you do, when you use a stamp, you need to clean it right away. You do not leave it, either go straight to a sink or grab a baby wipe. You got to get that paint off because any of that paint that stays on there will dry. So what I'm doing for now, just so that I can keep shooting, is I'm just going to wrap this in there, but that's okay. That's going to keep it moist enough that it won't cause me issues. And so at this point, what I can do is if I decide, well, I really want something that has like a lot of contrast between layers, and this is where, again, I can come over the top of this and remove some of this layer. Because sometimes what you want to do is sometimes you want to have layer on layer where everything looks a certain way, but then sometimes maybe what it is, you want to have certain stuff stay and certain stuff go. So if you're running into that, you can do a print like this. So I've done my print. It's pretty cool. It's pretty basic, but it gives you a little bit of text. It gives me a little bit of texture, and it looks really good. Okay, so now I pull this up. That looks really cool. Now I gotta let this dry because I can see here there's some spots there that are not fully dry. There's some stuff in the corner that's not fully dry. So as that's drying, now I can figure out what do I want to do with my next layer. And this is where I'm going to go a little bit away from my plan for this one. Now I'm going to go through and add some areas to my stencil. Let's say put another small area down here. Now I'm going to let that dry. Okay, so that's mostly dry. So then this is the question, is we can make a choice whether or not we want to add something a bit more contrasting to this again. Yeah, we can have the green, blue, and dark blue to green going. We have the white, and this is where, we have the red, and this is where I'm going to come across it with some white. That was a lot of white, so we're just going to take a whole bit and across the entire thing. Again, you don't want it too thick. You want to be able to see those layers underneath. If you can't see the layers underneath, like you can see here, so that's smeared, right? So you can see where the areas where I didn't have my paint fully dry, and it's not necessarily going to stick quite as well, but that should be enough paint on there that should pull up the next layer. So now let's take our print. Give it a good rub. Again, it should come off. It should want to really stick to the gel plate, right? So this is where that balance is between the paint, the layering, the drying time, and everything else. Okay, there we go. Okay. And so yeah, so you could almost feel like it peeling off. So I could have used a color other than white. I just, because of the fact that I was going for the reds and the greens and all this stuff, I didn't really want to muddy it too much. I wanted to keep it pretty pure in color. But you can see even with the white, because of the way some of my paint wasn't fully dry, you get some pinks, you get some of those other things coming up. So it's not really straight white just as it is. But you can see I basically have pulled almost all the paint off my surface. This is your ideal 3-layer print. And maybe I'll just do one more for you before we finish up here. And with this one, I'm just going to do this maybe one a little bit differently. I'm going to start with, a focal point image. So this is the thing, is you can use masks, which are the ones that don't have anything around the edges, you know, that are basically, you're basically masking the main image. In this case, we're actually painting in the main image. And it's a little harder to keep your paint super thin when you're doing it through a brayer on a small area like that. That's just kind of how it goes. But this is just going to need a little bit more drying time just to make sure it stays in a good place, right? And I got a little bit of this guy, so, you know, you can always just rub that off. So this might take up to like 5 minutes to kind of get all the drying to the level that you need it to be before you're ready to add in your next layer. So that's the thing, is depending on how much paint you use and how thin it is, again, you want it to not be shiny. If it's shiny, or if you touch it and you pull up paint with your finger, so like some of these areas are dry, there's a few areas that are still wet. Again, I want to have a crisp image, so I'm going to give it a little bit more time just to make sure that I end up with a really good image. So at this point, it's been about 3 minutes, 4 minutes lapse time. That's part of the reason I wanted to not rush over this bit. Because again, it's nice to see a lot of sped up videos, but then you miss out on the chance to learn this type of stuff, which is like, oh, it really does take that long to dry. And if you don't like watching paint dry, well, I don't either. But this is one of those situations where you're just going to have to kind of nicely suck it up a little bit. I don't mean that to be unkind, because I have to tell myself, I'm like, I don't like waiting for it to dry. And I'm like, Nadine, if you want to do gel printing, that's just the reality. So don't be a baby. And so I'm kind of, again, covering the whole layer with another layer of paint, right? And so I'm going very contrasting here. I'm hoping that that contrast is just going to, you know, add in some really nice layers. And again, we're trying to go thin here, because if we go thin, this also gives us some options for, again, adding in our next layer. And because I'm going to try to do a 3-layer print here again. I kind of showed it to you in the previous one, but I wanted to show you one more just straight from scratch. And this is just to try to give you a sense of where you can go with these, but at the same time, some of the complexity that goes into it. So, taking my script stamp, giving it a little push, because I think that's just going to look great. So we're just going to add in some of that script area, and I'm going to clean this baby right away. But the thing is, now we can come up with some other stamping. I have a flourish stamp. This one's always a great one. And this is where we can add in a little bit more variation with that. Okay. And I'm going to leave it at that. And now we have to let this layer dry. Okay, this layer is not perfectly dry, but I'm just going to go for it anyways, because I kind of want to finish off this thing. Okay, so start with red. Then we added in some blue and purple. So where do I want to go next? Pull in like a soft pink. You know what? I'm going to pull in some soft pink and some gold. That's my plan. We'll bring in some gold, because then we can have a little bit of that shine coming through. It's a hard thing sometimes with these bigger things of paint, is that you end up with a lot of paint coming out at one time, which is not ideal. But we're going to mix this. It's a fairly transparent gold, which is great, but it also kind of is a bit of a struggle sometimes, because then it doesn't always go on quite the same way as some of the other paints do. So we're going to add in a little bit of pink here as well too. That's quite opaque. So let's see what we get. So that's going on really thick. So we're going to have to keep bringing that out, adding it on top of the golden places. We do not want it on thick. If it's on super thick, we're not going to get this print to come up. It's that last layer that makes all the difference. Let's see if we have success. I always find this part the nerve-wracking part. It's like, is it gonna work? Did I just spend all this time on something that isn't? And this one I am centering it a little bit more, because if this works out, this could be a really nice piece all on of its own. Really good rough. Please come up. And I talked to my arts and science. It's like, please don't wreck on me. Come up perfectly. Ooh. This is looking promising. Nope, not yet. Okay, so I've left this for about 4 minutes now. So let's see. There we go. So if you find that you start lifting it and it's not coming off, let it dry more. I get the sense, I've heard people like, oh, I'll leave it drying like a really long time to get the perfect print. And you know what? Maybe that's the key, right? Like, I haven't really needed to, but that doesn't say you can't, right? So, and it is sticky, but it's coming on off. And this is why you need to have a well-conditioned gel plate, because I think if your gel plate's too sticky, this won't come off. But look at that. Because I did that way, I basically cleaned my gel plate. And now look at that. So I know it's pretty subtle because I have all of my areas of text and my little swirls there. That's where I could have gone for something really dark. But what I was worried about is that it would darken the whole piece so much that this would look really muted. And so that's why I went for the lighter color. But being said, you see little bits of text there. You see little bits here. This is actually a fairly detailed print. This is also where you could take the bird and do different things with it. So that is a 3-layer print. I'm really happy with this one, just because of the fact that this really shows you very well how you can execute a print like this successfully. I find the key to these techniques is practice, learning how much paint to use, how long to leave it to dry, and how to pull that print can take a few trial runs. Just remember, the more you practice, the better you will get. But I hope that this has helped you demystify the process and will get you using your gel plate in new and interesting ways. If you haven't checked out my previous video on gel plate printing, click here. If you are new to the gel plate, this is a great place to start to make sure that you master the basic techniques before trying layers. So make sure you come back for my next video. I'll be sharing how to practically use your gel prints in your next creative project. So I'll see you then.